The fluorescent light in the ICU hallway flickered at irregular intervals, emitting a sharp buzzing that pierced the ears of anyone who spent too much time there. The smell of disinfectant mixed with reheated coffee hung in the air. That artificial cleaning scent never quite managed to completely mask the metallic odor of blood and fear. Nora Campbell felt the bitter taste of bile rising in her throat. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched the clipboard against her chest, her fingers white from gripping so hard. 26 hours. 26 damn hours without closing her eyes, without sitting down, without eating more than half a granola bar she'd found crumpled in her lab coat pocket. New York Presbyterian Hospital was relentless. It didn't forgive weakness. It didn't accept excuses. And Nora was one of the best cardiovascular surgeons that place had ever seen. But even the best have limits. She just didn't know where hers was. Or maybe she did, and was determined to ignore it. Her legs felt like lead. Each step required conscious effort, as if she were walking underwater. The hallway stretched before her, endless, the white walls blending into one another. She blinked slowly, trying to focus her vision that was starting to blur at the edges. Just one more patient. Just one more vitals check, then you can rest. But it was a lie. She knew it was a lie. Her last patient of the night, or was it morning, had been Andrew Prescott, CEO of Prescott Pharmaceuticals, one of the pharmaceutical giants in the United States. 52 years old, acute myocardial infarction, 3 blocked arteries. She'd spent 7 hours in the operating room with him, stitching veins, rebuilding what years of corporate stress had destroyed. He'd survived. Against all odds, he'd survived. Nora remembered his eyes before the anesthesia took effect. Gray, piercing eyes that seemed to see through people like emotional X-rays. He hadn't shown fear, just a strange curiosity, almost challenging, as if he were assessing whether she was good enough to save him, as if he were deciding whether to trust his life to this 34-year-old woman with deep dark circles and hair pulled back in a messy bun. "You look tired, doctor," he'd said, his voice steady. "I am," she'd responded with brutal honesty, "but I'm going to keep you alive anyway." He'd smiled. A small smile, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Then we're both stubborn. Now, as she walked down the hallway toward the doctor's lounge, Nora felt the weight of that conversation. Stubborn? Yes, they were. But stubbornness didn't stop the human body from having its biological limits, and hers was about to be reached. The floor began to sway beneath her feet. No, it wasn't the floor. It was her legs failing. She reached out for the wall, trying to steady herself, but her fingers slipped on the smooth surface. The clipboard fell to the floor with a metallic crash that echoed through the empty hallway. Her knees gave out. The world spun. The fluorescent lights turned into blurred white streaks against the ceiling. And then, before her body hit the cold linoleum floor, strong arms caught her. The scent hit her first woody, citrus, something expensive, masculine, completely out of place in that hallway that smelled of antiseptic. She recognized it instantly. "Andrew? You're passing out, doctor." His voice was deep, controlled, but there was something in it, a note of concern he was trying to disguise with command. Nora forced her eyes open. Her vision was blurred, but she could make out his face, square jaw lightly covered with stubble, gray eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her heart, already exhausted, race dangerously. "I'm fine," she murmured, trying to straighten up, but her body wouldn't obey. "You should be in bed. Complete rest. And I'm here to tell you that you should be in bed too," he interrupted. There was something in the firmness of his voice that didn't accept arguments. He lifted her in his arms with unsettling ease, as if she weighed nothing, as if carrying a grown woman were the most natural thing in the world. "Put me down," Nora tried to protest, but her voice came out weak, without conviction. She felt the warmth of his body through the hospital gown, the thin fabric doing little to disguise the solidity of his muscles. Her face was too close to his neck, too close to ignore the pulse beating there strong and steady, thanks to her work. Thanks to the 7 hours she'd spent rebuilding his heart. "You saved my life today," Andrew said as he walked down the hallway, carrying her like she was a porcelain doll. "I'm not going to let you throw yours away out of pure stubbornness." Nurses walked by and stared, mouths agape. An intern dropped his coffee cup. But Andrew didn't seem to care. He just kept walking with that unwavering determination he probably used to close multi-million-dollar deals. Nora wanted to argue. She wanted to say she was fine, that she could walk on her own, that she didn't need to be carried by a post-operative patient who should be on complete bed rest. But the words wouldn't come. Her body had finally given up fighting. And for the first time in years, maybe in her entire life, Nora Campbell allowed herself to be cared for. She closed her eyes, feeling his breathing move against her shoulder, hearing the rhythmic sound of his footsteps echoing through the hallway. And in that moment, something inside her, something that had been broken for a long time, began slowly to awaken. But she didn't know yet what that meant. She didn't know that being in Andrew Prescott's arms was just the beginning. That this man, with his gray eyes and relentless stubbornness, was about to turn her world upside down. The hallway continued to stretch ahead. The fluorescent lights kept flickering. But for Nora, in that instant, the world had narrowed down to a single sensation, that of being finally safe. Even if it was in a stranger's arms, even if it was in the arms of the man whose heart she had held in her hands just hours before. The door to the room opened with a soft click, revealing a space that had nothing to do with the hospital's regular rooms. The 9th floor was reserved for VIP patients, those whose names appeared in business magazines, whose donations kept entire wings running. Andrew Prescott's room looked more like a 5-star hotel suite than a hospital environment. Light wood flooring, floor-to-ceiling windows with a view of the Manhattan skyline. Minimalist, designer furniture. Even the smell was different. There was no trace of disinfectant here, just a gentle lavender scent coming from a discreet diffuser in the corner. Nora could barely process her surroundings. Her eyes burned, heavy as stones. Every muscle in her body screamed for rest. She felt Andrew cross the room with firm, measured steps, the movement smooth despite carrying her. He stopped beside a king-sized bed with impeccable white sheets, so white they seemed to glow under the soft light from the side lamps. With a gentleness that contrasted completely with the authority he exuded, Andrew laid her on the mattress. The fabric was soft, luxurious, nothing like the rough, worn sheets in the doctor's lounge where Nora usually took 15-minute naps between surgeries. She sank into that comfort as if being swallowed by a cloud. "No," Nora murmured, trying to sit up. Her arms trembled with the effort. "I can't. You need to rest. You just came out of heart surgery. I shouldn't. Be still." Andrew's voice was firm, but there was no harshness in it, just command, the kind he probably used in boardrooms when closing million-dollar deals. He placed his hand on her shoulder, a firm touch but surprisingly gentle, and prevented her from getting up. Their eyes met. Nora felt the air catch in her lungs. Those gray eyes were like liquid steel in the soft light of the room, watching her with an intensity that made every nerve ending in her body awaken. There was something in that gaze, a mixture of concern, determination, and something more. Something she couldn't name but that made her heart beat irregularly. "You take care of everyone, Nora," Andrew said quietly, as if revealing a secret only he knew. He pronounced her name in a way no one had ever pronounced it before, as if it were precious, as if it mattered. "Now it's my turn to take care of you." She opened her mouth to protest, but no words came out, just a tired, defeated sigh. Andrew was still bent over her, so close she could see the fine lines around his eyes, marks of years carrying the weight of impossible decisions, so close she felt the heat radiating from his skin, so close that if she wanted, she could count every dark lash that framed those devastating eyes. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his fingers lightly grazing her cheek. The touch was warm. Electric. Nora felt a shiver run down her spine, her skin tingling where he had touched. "When was the last time someone took care of you?" Andrew asked, his voice even lower, almost a whisper. Nora had no answer. She couldn't remember. Since entering medical school, her life had been an endless succession of shifts, surgeries, emergencies. She took care of everyone, patients, residents, even the nurses when they needed someone to listen. But her, who took care of her? No one. The realization hit like a punch to the stomach. No one. "Rest," Andrew ordered gently, straightening up. But he didn't leave. He just stood there next to the bed, watching her like a silent guardian. Before Nora could protest again, the door opened and a nurse entered. Marissa, one of the hospital veterans Nora had worked with dozens of times. The woman's eyes widened at the scene. Dr. Campbell lying in the millionaire patient's bed, pale as paper, while the patient himself stood wearing only his hospital gown with a protective posture that left no room for misunderstanding. "Mr. Prescott, you should be." Marissa began. "She needs IV fluids," Andrew interrupted, pointing at Nora with a decisive gesture. "Severe dehydration, possibly hypoglycemia. How many hours has she gone without eating?" Marissa hesitated, her eyes alternating between Andrew and Nora. "I don't know, sir." "More than 24, Nora murmured, her eyes closing involuntarily. "Maybe 30. 30 hours." Andrew repeated the words as if they were an accusation. He looked at Marissa with an expression that probably made competing CEOs tremble. "IV fluids. Now." Marissa nodded quickly and left to get the equipment. The silence that followed was dense, charged with something unspoken. Nora forced her eyes open again, finding Andrew still there, still watching her with that unsettling intensity. "You can't do this," she said, her voice weak. "I'm your doctor. This is inappropriate." "What would be inappropriate is letting you pass out in the hallway and hit your head on the floor," Andrew retorted. He pulled up a chair and sat beside the bed as if preparing to stay there all night. "You saved my life today, Dr. Campbell. Let me at least return the favor by making sure you don't die of exhaustion." There was a twisted logic to that which Nora didn't have the energy to contest. Marissa returned with the IV bag and stand. She set up the line in Nora's vein with professional efficiency, but her eyes still cast curious glances between the doctor and the patient. "I'll leave you two," Marissa said, adjusting the drip rate. "But Dr. Campbell, if you need anything." "She'll be fine," Andrew said before Nora could respond. "I'll take care of her." After Marissa left, closing the door softly, the room plunged into an almost sacred silence. Just the sound of the IV dripping in the tube, rhythmic and steady like a metronome. Nora felt the cold liquid entering her vein, spreading through her body, beginning to replenish what she had denied herself for so long. Andrew said nothing. He just stayed there, sitting in the chair, watching her. But it wasn't a clinical, professional look. It was something deeper. His eyes traveled over every feature of her face, the dark circles, the pale skin, the chapped lips, as if he were memorizing every detail, as if he were trying to understand a complex puzzle he'd just discovered. "Why do you do this?" Andrew finally asked, breaking the silence. "Do what?" Nora murmured, her eyes fighting to stay open. "Work yourself to death. Destroy yourself for people you don't even know." Nora was silent for a long moment. It was a good question, one she asked herself sometimes, on the rare occasions when she allowed such thoughts to penetrate her defenses. "Because if I don't," she finally said, her voice barely a whisper, "who will?" Andrew leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. The light from the window cast shadows on his face, making his features even more striking. "And who takes care of you, Nora, when you collapse?" "No one," she wanted to say. "No one ever has." But the words didn't come out, because saying it out loud would make it real, would make undeniable the emptiness she carried, the loneliness she'd learned to disguise with endless shifts and an infinite list of patients to save. Her eyes finally closed, not by choice, but from pure exhaustion. Her body simply shut down, unable to fight anymore. But even as she drifted into sleep, she could still feel it, his presence, the warmth, the woody scent of cologne mixed with something purely masculine. And for the first time in years, Nora Campbell fell asleep feeling safe, even if it was just an illusion. Even if when she woke up everything would go back to normal. Even so, for that moment, she allowed herself to believe that someone that he actually cared. Andrew sat watching her sleep, her face finally relaxed, the lines of tension softening. And something inside him, something that had been dead for a long time, began to awaken. Nora awoke to the soft morning light, filtering through the translucent curtains. For a moment, just one brief, confused moment, she didn't know where she was. The mattress was too soft. The sheet smelled of lavender and not industrial detergent. And there was silence, a deep silence, almost unnatural for someone accustomed to the incessant beeping of heart monitors and urgent announcements over the hospital intercom. Then memory returned like a wave. The hallway, the fainting, Andrew carrying her, those gray eyes watching her as if he could see through all her carefully constructed defenses. She sat up abruptly, her heart racing. The IV was no longer connected to her arm. Someone had removed it during the night, probably Marissa, always efficient, always discreet. Nora looked around the empty room. The chair where Andrew had been sitting was empty now, but there was still a slight impression on the seat, as if he'd stayed there for a long time. How long did I sleep? The light coming through the window suggested mid-morning. She grabbed her phone. Someone, probably the same someone, had placed it on the nightstand beside her. 10:43 a.m. She'd slept almost 10 hours. 10 hours? When was the last time she'd slept that much? Nora stood up, still wearing yesterday's wrinkled scrubs. Her muscles protested, sore from accumulated exhaustion, but she felt better, more lucid, more human. She walked to the window, watching Manhattan stretch out before her, an endless sea of buildings, glass and steel gleaming under the October sun. The door opened behind her. Nora turned and found Andrew standing in the doorway, no longer wearing the hospital gown but casual clothes, dark jeans and a gray shirt that brought out the color of his eyes. He held 2 cups of coffee, steam rising in delicate spirals. "You're awake," he said. There was something in his voice, relief, satisfaction. "I was starting to think you'd sleep until tomorrow." "I shouldn't have slept even this much," Nora replied, running her hands through her disheveled hair. "I have patients. I have surgery scheduled. I need to. Already taken care of." Andrew entered the room, extending one of the cups to her. "I spoke with Dr. Morrison this morning. Your patients have been redistributed. Your surgeries rescheduled. You're officially off duty for the next 48 hours. Nora's mouth fell open. "You did what?" "You can't. You don't have the authority to." "I do when my annual donation keeps half this hospital running." His voice was calm, factual, without arrogance, just stating a fact. "And when the director agrees with me that a surgeon working 30 hours straight is a risk both to herself and to her patients." Anger exploded in Nora's chest like a struck match. "You had no right." She took a step toward him, but Andrew didn't back away. He just stood there holding the coffee cups, those gray eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her argument die in her throat. "Drink the coffee," he said softly. "Then you can yell at me all you want." Nora took the cup with more force than necessary, the hot liquid swaying dangerously close to the rim. She took a sip. It was perfect, strong, bitter, exactly how she liked it. How did he know? "You can't just control my life," she said, but the anger was already fading, replaced by something more complicated, confusion, reluctant gratitude, something she refused to name. Andrew took a sip of his own coffee, watching her over the rim of the cup. "I'm not trying to control your life, Nora. I'm trying to save it just like you saved mine." The silence that followed was dense, charged. Nora looked away, unable to sustain that intensity. Her eyes fell on her bag, carelessly tossed on the sofa near the window. The bag was open, probably from when Marissa had gotten her phone, and something white was sticking out of the opening. Andrew followed her gaze. And then, before she could react, he walked to the sofa and picked up whatever it was. Envelopes. Several white envelopes, with red stamped letters. Final notice. Overdue payment. Third notice. Nora's heart sank. "No," she whispered, setting down her cup and crossing the room in 3 strides. "Give me those." "That's none of your business." But Andrew was already looking. His eyes scanned the envelopes, hospital bills, medical treatment invoices, eviction notices. His face hardened, not with judgment, but with something that looked like pain. "How much?" He raised his eyes to her, his voice controlled but loaded with something she couldn't identify. "How much do you need to settle all of this?" "It's none of your business," Nora repeated, trying to snatch the envelopes from his hands. But Andrew held them firmly, not with force, but with determination. "Your mother?" He read one of the bills. "Cancer treatment. Stage 4. His eyes met hers again, and there was something in them now understanding, empathy. "That's why you work yourself nearly to death. You're paying for her treatment." Nora felt tears burning behind her eyes. She blinked hard, refusing to let them fall. "I handle my own problems." "I'm sure you do." Andrew carefully placed the envelopes back in her bag, each movement deliberate, respectful. "But what if you didn't have to do it alone? What are you suggesting?" Nora's voice came out harsher than she intended. "That you're going to pay my bills?" "I don't accept charity, Mr. Prescott. It's not charity." He took a step toward her, closing the distance between them. "It's a job." Nora frowned. I already have a job. One that's killing you. He said the words with such certainty it was impossible to argue. And that clearly doesn't pay enough to cover what you need. The truth of his words was like a slap. Nora looked away, shame burning in her cheeks. She'd spent years building her career, becoming one of the best in her field. And still, it wasn't enough. It was never enough. I need a personal physician, Andrew continued, his voice soft but firm. Someone who understands cardiac surgery. Someone I trust. Someone like you. Nora laughed a humorless sound. You just came out of surgery. You need follow-up. Yes, but not a full-time doctor, do I? Andrew tilted his head, studying her. I have 47 companies under my command. I travel 3 times a month. I sleep 4 hours a night when I sleep. My last doctor said I was cheerfully marching toward a second heart attack. Sounds like I need constant supervision. There was a twisted logic to it. But Nora could still see the gaps. You could hire any doctor in the country. But I want you. The words came out simple, direct, loaded with a weight that made Nora's heart skip a beat. The silence stretched between them, dense and electric. Nora could hear her own heart beating in her ears, feel the heat radiating from his body so close now that she could see the small golden flecks in his gray eyes. I can't just abandon my career, she began. But her voice came out weak, without conviction. 3 months, Andrew said. 3 months, as my personal physician. Full-time. You travel with me, supervise my health, make sure I don't die doing something stupid. At the end of 3 months, if you want to return to the hospital, you can. No questions, no judgment. And how much are you offering for this medical babysitting? Nora crossed her arms, trying to seem skeptical, but curiosity was already taking hold. Andrew held her gaze for a long moment, then said with the same simplicity of someone commenting on the weather, $1 million per month. The world stopped. Nora blinked once, twice. Surely she'd heard wrong. What? 3 million total. 1 million per month. Payment up front on day 1. He said the words as if he were offering $100, not an amount that would completely change her life. You're insane, Nora whispered. Probably, Andrew agreed. But there was a small smile on his lips now. But I pay well for insanity. This is... Nora searched for the right words. Absurd. No doctor is worth that much. You are. He said it with such certainty it was almost impossible not to believe. To me, you are. Nora shook her head, taking a step back, needing distance, needing air. I need to think. Of course. Andrew didn't try to stop her. Think. But while you're thinking, remember how long until you get evicted? How long until your mother can't afford treatment anymore? How long until you pass out again? And next time, maybe there won't be anyone to catch you. The words were harsh, but not cruel, just honest. Brutally, unbearably honest. Nora looked at him, really looked. She saw not just the billionaire CEO, not just the patient she'd saved. She saw a man who, for reasons she didn't fully understand, seemed to genuinely care. And that was more frightening than any amount of money. I'll think about it, she repeated, grabbing her bag. Take all the time you need. Andrew stepped back, giving her space. But Nora, this isn't charity. It's an investment in you. And as she left the room, feeling the weight of the envelopes in her bag and the weight of his gaze on her back, Nora knew her answer was already formed. She just didn't know yet if she was ready to admit it. Rain beat against the taxi windows as Nora watched the glass and steel skyscraper rising before her like a modern monolith. Prescott Tower. 62 floors of corporate power cutting through Manhattan's gray sky. Every square inch of that building screamed money, influence a world completely different from what she knew. She tightened her grip on the leather bag strap new, sent by Andrew, along with an entire wardrobe of professional clothes that probably cost more than her annual hospital salary. Dress appropriately for the environment. Read the note that accompanied the boxes. No arrogance in the words, just practicality, as if he knew she wouldn't have clothes for that world. And he was right. She hated that he was right. The taxi stopped in front of the main entrance. Nora paid, got out, and was immediately hit by the icy October wind that cut between buildings like blades. She pulled the coat black cashmere, absurdly soft, tighter around her body and ran toward the revolving doors. The lobby was everything she expected and more. White marble, crystal chandeliers that looked like small suspended galaxies, the soft sound of her heels echoing against the polished floor. Executives in impeccable suits crossed the space with hurried steps, each seeming to have an important destination, a crucial meeting, a $1 million deal to close. Nora felt small, out of place, an imposter dressed in expensive clothes, trying to belong to a world that would never be hers. Dr. Campbell. A female voice pulled her from her thoughts. A blonde woman, probably in her late 20s, wearing a perfectly tailored black suit, approached with a professional smile. "I'm Rebecca, Mr. Prescott's assistant. He's waiting for you in his office, 50th floor." Of course he was at the top. Where else would a billionaire CEO have his office? Rebecca guided her to a private elevator because apparently regular elevators were for regular people. The interior was all mirrors, and Nora avoided her own reflection. She didn't want to see the uncertainty in her eyes, the barely disguised fear. The elevator rose in silence, so smooth it was almost impossible to feel the movement. Rebecca maintained her polite smile, but Nora could feel the discreet glances assessing her clothes, her hair pulled back in a professional bun, trying to understand who this woman was who had direct access to the CEO. If only she knew. "I'm trying to understand that too." The doors opened with a soft ding, revealing a wide hallway with glass walls on one side offering a panoramic view of Manhattan. On the other side, dark wood doors with discreet plaques, executive board, conference room, legal department, and at the end of the hallway, 2 imposing double doors with a simple plaque in silver letters, "Andrew Prescott, CEO." Rebecca knocked lightly and opened the doors without waiting for an answer. "Dr. Campbell, Mr. Prescott." Nora entered, and the doors closed behind her with a soft click that sounded definitive, as if one chapter of her life had ended and another was beginning. The office was intimidating, enormous, floor-to-ceiling glass walls on 2 sides, offering a 180-degree view of the city, an imposing desk of dark walnut so large it could serve as a dining table, shelves filled with books not just for decoration, but actually read, with worn spines and bookmarks between pages, and in the corner a seating area with black leather sofas and a coffee table where rested a bottle of whiskey and 2 crystal glasses. But Nora barely registered any of it because Andrew was standing near the window, his back to her, talking on the phone. And God, the sight of him did something strange to her stomach. He wore dark gray suit pants and a white shirt, but it wasn't the typical corporate formality. The sleeves were rolled up to his elbows, revealing strong, defined forearms. The tie was loose around his neck, the first button of the shirt open. His hair, normally combed back, was slightly disheveled, as if he'd run his hands through it several times. He looked human. Powerful, yes, but human. And for some reason, that was more attractive than any perfectly tailored suit could be. "I don't care what the legal department said," Andrew was saying into the phone, his voice firm but controlled. "If we can't do this ethically, we don't do it. Period. Find another solution." He hung up and turned around. His eyes met hers instantly, and Nora felt the impact like a physical punch. Those gray eyes that had haunted her for the past 3 days, that appeared in her dreams, that made her question decisions she'd already made. A small smile, almost imperceptible, touched his lips. "You came." "I said I would," Nora replied, trying to sound professional, controlled, but her voice came out a little huskier than she intended. Andrew walked toward her, not hurried, but deliberate. Each step measured, confident. He stopped right in front of her, close enough that she could feel the heat emanating from his body, close enough that that woody scent enveloped her senses like fog. "Let me take that," he said softly, reaching for her coat. Nora stood paralyzed as his fingers brushed her shoulders, sliding the coat down her arms with an almost reverent slowness. She wore a navy blue dress, simple, professional, but it followed the lines of her body in a way that suddenly seemed much less professional under that intense gaze. Andrew hung the coat on the nearby coat rack, then turned to her again. But he didn't step back. He stayed there so close that Nora had to tilt her head slightly back to meet his eyes. "From now on," he said, his voice low, almost intimate, "you take care of me, but I'm also going to take care of you." The words echoed in the space between them, loaded with meaning. Nora felt the touch of his fingers light, almost accidental slip from the coat sleeve to her bare arm, leaving a trail of heat on her skin. She should step away, should establish professional boundaries, should remember that this was a job, a contract, nothing more. But her body didn't move, and when his eyes traveled over her face, lingering on her lips for a moment that lasted an eternity, she forgot why she should step away. "I prepared an office for you," Andrew finally said, taking a step back, breaking the spell. "Adjacent to mine. You'll have full access to my medical records, my schedule, everything you need to monitor my health." He guided her to a side door that Nora hadn't noticed before. When he opened it, it revealed a smaller but still impressive office. Modern design desk, empty shelves waiting to be filled, a large window overlooking the Hudson River. But what caught her attention was the medical examination table in the corner, state-of-the-art cardiac monitoring equipment, a cabinet that was probably stocked with medical supplies. "You turned this into a clinic," Nora murmured, entering slowly. "You're a doctor," Andrew replied, leaning against the doorframe, watching her explore the space. "I thought you'd need a proper place to work." Nora ran her fingers over the smooth surface of the desk, feeling the cold texture of the wood. Everything there was perfect, professional, exactly what she would need. So why did it feel like a trap? "Your first task," Andrew said, and there was a touch of humor in his voice now, "is to convince me to take a lunch break. Apparently my last doctor said I needed to stop working, like every day was my last." Nora turned to face him, crossing her arms. "And you completely ignored her advice religiously." His smile was mischievous, now genuine, and it completely transformed his face, removing years of tension, revealing the man beneath the relentless CEO. "Then why would it be different with me?" Nora asked, raising an eyebrow. Andrew pushed off from the doorframe, walking slowly toward her again. Each step deliberate, each movement loaded with intention. He stopped when he was close enough that she had to tilt her head back again, close enough that she could count every dark lash, every small line around those devastating eyes. "Because," he said softly, his voice low, intimate, sending shivers down her spine, "when you speak, I listen." The air between them became dense, charged with something unspoken, something dangerous. Nora could feel her heart pounding hard against her ribs, her skin tingling where his gaze touched. And he was looking, really looking, not just at her, but through her, as if he could see every thought, every fear, every secret desire she hid. "Mr. Prescott," she began, trying to regain some sense of professionalism. "Andrew," he corrected gently. "When we're alone." "It's Andrew." "Andrew," she repeated, and the name sounded different on her tongue, intimate, dangerous. "We need to establish professional boundaries." Of course, he agreed too easily. Professional boundaries. "You're my doctor. I'm your patient." Completely appropriate. But the way he said the words, the way his eyes lingered on her lips, how his voice dropped half a tone, how he didn't step back, made everything less appropriate. "Well," Nora said, her voice coming out firmer now, finding her professional balance, "then, as your doctor, my first order is you're going to lunch. A proper meal, not just coffee." "Yes, doctor." There was humor in his voice, but also something more, something warm, something that made her stomach tighten in ways that had nothing to do with professionalism. Andrew finally stepped away, and Nora could breathe again. But even with the distance, she could still feel it, his presence, the magnetism, the gravitational pull impossible to ignore. And as he returned to his office, leaving the door between them, open a physical connection between their spaces, Nora realized something terrifying. She was in danger. Not the kind of danger she could see coming, but the kind that infiltrated slowly, inevitably, until it was so deep there was no escape. The kind of danger that had gray eyes and a smile that disarmed all her defenses. And for the first time since entering that building, Nora wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake, or if perhaps she'd made the only right choice of her life. 3 weeks, 21 days working alongside Andrew Prescott, and Nora still hadn't gotten used to the intensity of that man. The way he looked at her during meetings, as if she were the only person in the room. The way his fingers brushed hers when passing documents. The small smiles, intimate, reserved only for her. Every day was a silent battle between professionalism and something much more dangerous. And then came the invitation. Prescott Pharmaceuticals' annual charity gala, read the card in embossed gold letters. Attire, black tie. And attached to the invitation, delivered directly to her desk by Rebecca with a knowing smile, was a handwritten note in elegant masculine handwriting. Wear this tonight. I want the world to see you the way I see you. Nora found the box on her desk an hour later, large, flat, wrapped in matte black paper with a red satin ribbon. When she opened it, her heart stopped. The dress was red. Not just red, it was the color of desire, of danger, of passion. Liquid silk that flowed through her fingers like crimson water. One shoulder, cut at the waist. Side slits that went up to the thigh. It was scandalously elegant, provocative without being vulgar. A work of art that cost more than 3 months of her old salary. She should return it. Should say it was inappropriate. Should establish boundaries. But at 6 o'clock in the evening, when she looked at herself in the mirror of her office's private bathroom, Nora barely recognized the woman staring back. The dress wrapped around her body like a second skin, highlighting every curve she normally hid under scrubs or professional suits. Her hair fell in loose waves over her bare shoulders. Rebecca had insisted on calling a hairstylist. The makeup was subtle but impactful, eyes marked with dark shadow, red lipstick matching the dress perfectly. Diamond earrings, borrowed, Rebecca had assured, sparkled every time she moved her head. She looked powerful, desirable, dangerous. Who is this woman? The knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. Nora opened it, and the world stopped. Andrew stood in the hallway wearing an impeccable black tuxedo, starched white shirt, perfectly adjusted bow tie. But it wasn't the clothes that made her heart race. It was the expression on his face. He stopped, literally froze mid-step. His eyes widened slightly. His gaze traveled over her body slowly. From her feet in silver high-heeled sandals, up her legs that the slit revealed in teasing flashes, lingering on her marked waist, on her bare shoulders, finally settling on her face. His eyes darkened that light gray, transforming into a storm, into barely contained desire. Nora. His voice came out rough, as if he'd forgotten how to form words. She couldn't respond, couldn't even breathe properly with the way he looked at her, as if she were the only real thing in a world of illusions. Andrew took a step toward her, then another, until he was close enough that she felt the heat emanating from his body. He slowly raised his hand, giving her time to pull back if she wanted. But she didn't pull back. His fingers touched her face with a reverence that made her skin shiver. He ran his thumb over her cheekbone as if memorizing the texture, then took a strand of hair and tucked it behind her ear. Such a simple gesture, but executed with such delicacy that Nora felt tears burn behind her eyes. "You are," Andrew began, then stopped, shaking his head as if words were inadequate. His hand slid from her face to her neck, his thumb gently caressing the line of her jaw. "You have no idea what you're doing to me. Dressed like this." Their breathing mingled in the narrow space between them, hot and charged with unspoken promises. Nora could see the pulse beating in his neck, fast, erratic, proof that she wasn't the only one affected. "We should go," she whispered, but didn't move, couldn't move when he looked at her that way, as if she were water in the desert. "Yes," Andrew agreed, but also didn't step back. His fingers traced a slow, tortuous line from her neck to her bare shoulder, leaving a trail of fire on her skin. "We should." Neither of them moved. The moment stretched, tense as a violin string about to break. Then, as if something inside him finally gave way, Andrew took a step back, breaking physical contact but not visual. His eyes still consumed her, still spoke of things his mouth refused to say. "The car is waiting," he finally said, extending his arm, a chivalrous gesture, safe, appropriate. Nora placed her hand on his arm, feeling the tense muscles beneath the tuxedo fabric, and together they walked toward the elevators, toward the event, toward something neither of them was ready to name. The gala was everything Nora expected and feared. The Four Seasons ballroom was an explosion of luxury. Crystal chandeliers projecting rainbows on the walls, tables decorated with white rose arrangements and twinkling candles, an orchestra playing soft classical music in the corner. Men in expensive tuxedos and women in designer dresses circulated with champagne glasses, laughing politely, doing networking disguised as casual conversations. Nora felt like an actress on a stage where she didn't know the lines. Everyone looked. Everyone saw. When Andrew entered with her on his arm, she could feel the stares, curious, envious, calculating. Who is she? Where did she come from? What does she have that the others don't? If only I knew the answer. You're tense, Andrew murmured near her ear, his breath hot against her skin, making her shiver. I'm out of my element, she admitted in a low voice. His hand covered hers on his arm, squeezing gently. You're the most fascinating woman in this room. Everyone else is just shadows. The words were absurd, impossible, but the way he said them with absolute conviction made her heart squeeze painfully. The evening unfolded in a succession of introductions that Nora immediately forgot. Polite conversations that led nowhere, fake smiles that didn't reach people's eyes. She met CEOs, directors, politicians, all eager to impress Andrew, all ignoring her completely, or treating her with a condescending cordiality that made her skin prickle with irritation. After 2 hours, when Andrew was dragged into his 5th business conversation, this one with a senator whose laugh was too loud and whose eyes were too cold, Nora murmured an excuse and escaped. She found the terrace through glass doors at the back of the ballroom. The cold October night air hit her like a refreshing wave after the suffocating heat of the crowded room. She walked to the balustrade, resting her hands on the cold marble, breathing deeply. Manhattan stretched before her, an endless sea of twinkling lights, life pulsing through the veins of the city that never sleeps. From up here, everything seemed small, manageable, as if the problems that haunted her could be solved simply by observing them from far enough away. But she knew it was an illusion. The sound of the door opening behind her made her turn. Andrew stood in the doorway, his silhouette outlined against the golden light of the ballroom. He closed the door with a soft click that seemed definitive, isolating them from the rest of the world. Silence. Just the distant sound of traffic below, the cold wind whispering between buildings. Andrew walked toward her with that predatory grace that made her stomach tighten. He removed his tuxedo jacket and, without saying a word, placed it over her bare shoulders. The fabric was still warm from his body, carrying that woody scent that haunted her dreams. Nora pulled the jacket tighter around herself, not just because of the cold, but because it was the closest thing to an embrace she could have without crossing a dangerous line. You ran away, Andrew said softly, stopping beside her at the balustrade, their shoulders almost touching. I was suffocating in there, Nora admitted. All those smiling faces with knives hidden behind their backs, everyone pretending to be friends while calculating how to use each other. Welcome to my world. There was bitterness in his voice, but also acceptance, as if he'd made peace with the predatory nature of his environment long ago. How do you stand it? Nora turned to face him, studying his profile. The strong line of his jaw, the straight nose, the lips she'd fantasized about kissing more times than she'd like to admit. Andrew was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Then he turned to her, and there was something in his gaze, something raw, vulnerable, real. Because until now, he said softly, I didn't have a reason not to stand it. It was just what I did, who I was. He took a step toward her. But now, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Nora felt her heart racing, the air becoming denser, charged with possibilities. Andrew, we can't. Can't what? He took another step, closing the distance between them until there was nothing left but inches and ragged breaths. Pretend we don't feel this. Pretend that every time you walk into a room, my heart doesn't beat faster. Pretend I don't think about you every damn night. The words came out rough, desperate, torn from some deep place he normally kept locked. I'm your doctor, Nora whispered. But the objection sounded weak even to her own ears. You're the only real thing in this world of masks. And then, as if a dam had finally broken, he cupped her face in his hands. The touch was firm but incredibly gentle, his thumbs caressing her cheeks as if she were made of glass. Their foreheads touched, breaths mingling in the non-existent space between them. His eyes met hers stormy, hungry, asking permission even while already beyond the point of return. Tell me to stop, he whispered, his voice loaded with barely contained desire. Tell me and I'll stop. But Nora couldn't form the words because the truth, the terrifying, impossible truth, was that she didn't want him to stop. And then he kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't hesitant. It was hunger and desire, and 3 weeks of accumulated tension exploding into flames. His lips captured hers with an intensity that took all the air from her lungs, claiming, demanding, giving at the same time. Nora's hands grabbed the front of his shirt, pulling him closer, kneading him closer. His arms wrapped around her, one hand sliding down her bare back, pressing their bodies together until there was no space between them, until she could feel every hard line of his body against hers. The kiss deepened, intensified. His tongue traced the line of her lips, asking for entry, and she granted it without hesitation. The taste of him whiskey and something purely masculine flooded her senses, making her dizzy, making her legs weaken. Andrew pressed her against the balustrade, his body a wall of heat and solid muscle against her. She could feel his heart pounding hard against her chest, as fast as hers, proof that she wasn't alone in this madness. Her red lipstick stained his lips, marking him, claiming him in some primitive way. And when he pulled back just enough to look at the red trail on his mouth, he smiled a slow, sensual, satisfied smile, as if it were art. "You've been driving me crazy since the moment I caught you in that hallway," he confessed against her lips, his voice rough, broken, "and I don't want to pretend anymore." Nora couldn't respond, couldn't form coherent thoughts. So she simply kissed him again, pouring 3 weeks of repressed desire, of sleepless nights, of secret fantasies into that single kiss. There under the Manhattan night sky, with the red dress billowing around her legs in the cold wind and Andrew's arms firm around her, protecting her from the entire world, something ignited between them, something dangerous, something irreversible, something that would change everything. And Nora knew with absolute certainty that there was no going back. She had crossed the line, and she didn't regret it one bit. The morning light came through the curtains of Nora's apartment, too soft, too gentle for the chaos that was about to explode in her life. She sat at the kitchen table, her cup of coffee cooling between her hands, her lips still swollen from last night's kisses, her whole body still vibrating with the memory. Andrew's hands on her skin, the taste of him in her mouth, the way he'd whispered her name like a prayer. "You changed everything," he'd said when they finally pulled apart, foreheads touching, breaths still uneven. "There's no going back." And she had agreed. God, how she had agreed. But now, under the unforgiving light of reality, fear was beginning to seep in. She had crossed every professional line. She had gotten involved with her patient, her employer, a man whose world was so different from hers it might as well be another planet. What have I done? The phone vibrated on the table, pulling her from her thoughts. A notification. Unknown number. Message with attachment. Nora opened it without thinking, and her world crumbled. The photo was too clear, cruel in its details. Her and Andrew on the terrace, bodies pressed together, him holding her face, the kiss captured at the exact moment it deepened. Intimate, undeniable, impossible to explain as anything other than what it was. But it wasn't just the photo. It was the message that accompanied it. How much does a doctor cost these days? Is $3 million the price of your dignity? If you don't stay away from him, everyone will know the truth. Everyone will know you're just another woman he bought. And everyone will know who really paid for your mother's treatment. Nora's blood froze. Her hands trembled so much she almost dropped the phone. How did they know? How did someone know about the money, about the treatment, about... A second message arrived. Another photo, this one from the hospital. Nora entering the oncology wing visiting her mother. And attached to it, digital copies of medical bills all marked paid in full. And on the payer line, Prescott Pharmaceuticals Foundation. No, no, no. She had never authorized this, never asked. The agreement was just her salary. She would use her own money to pay her mother's bills. That's how it would work. Clean, honest, hers. But Andrew had gone beyond, had paid everything without asking, without telling. A third message. You have 24 hours to resign, or the photo goes to all the major New York newspapers. And believe me, they'll love the story of the doctor who sold herself to the billionaire CEO. Nora felt bile rise in her throat. Shame, anger, fear, everything mixing into a toxic storm that threatened to suffocate her. She needed to go to him, needed to understand, needed to end this. Prescott Tower seemed even more intimidating today, every inch of glass and steel reflecting her own pale face back at her. Nora crossed the lobby in quick steps, ignoring the polite greetings from the staff, ignoring the curious looks that always followed her. She didn't wait for Rebecca to announce her arrival, just opened Andrew's double office doors with enough force to make them bang against the walls. Andrew was on the phone but hung up immediately when he saw her. A smile began to form on his lips, that intimate, personal smile reserved for her, but died when he saw the expression on her face. Nora. He stood up from his chair, coming around the desk toward her. What happened? She threw her phone on his desk. The screen still showed the photo, the kiss, the threat. Andrew picked up the phone. His eyes scanned the message. His jaw tightened, muscles jumping under his skin. His eyes darkened, not with desire like yesterday, but with cold, controlled, dangerous anger. Who sent this? His voice was low, deadly. I don't know. It doesn't matter. Nora crossed her arms, trying to protect herself, trying to maintain some composure when everything inside her was falling apart. What matters is that it's right. I sold myself. I took your money, wore your clothes, lived in your world, and now what? Andrew placed the phone back on the desk with controlled care. You're going to let some anonymous coward dictate your life. You paid for my mother's treatment. The words came out as an accusation. Without asking me, without telling me, you just bought her debt. Something passed over his face, guilt, regret. I was going to tell you when. Nora laughed, a harsh sound without humor. When you found it convenient? When I was already so tangled up in your life I couldn't get out? It wasn't like that. Andrew took a step toward her, but Nora backed away. The hurt in his eyes at seeing the movement was like a punch, but she couldn't. She couldn't. Then how was it? She asked, her voice trembling. Explain it to me, Andrew. Explain to me how this doesn't look exactly like what that message says. How this doesn't look like you bought me. Because I never. Nora began, but her voice broke. What I feel for you has nothing to do with money. His voice was loaded with raw emotion, vulnerable in a way she'd never heard before. I paid because I couldn't stand watching you destroy yourself. Because every time I saw those bills in your bag, every time I saw you skip meals to save money, something inside me broke. You had no right. The tears finally started to fall, hot and unwanted. You had no right to make that decision for me. I know. Andrew ran his hands through his hair, frustration and desperation fighting on his face. I know I didn't, but I did it anyway because I needed to do something. Because watching you suffer was unbearable. The silence that followed was dense, suffocating. Nora could hear her own broken heart beating in her ears, could feel every defense she'd built rising again, protective walls she'd lowered last night, being rebuilt brick by brick. I'm going to resign, she said finally, her voice empty, distant. I'm going to return every penny you paid me, and I'm going to find a way to pay for my mother's treatment myself. Nora, no. Andrew tried to reach her again, but she moved away, maintaining physical distance because she knew if he touched her, all her resolutions would crumble. I have to. She wiped the tears with the back of her hand, forcing herself to stand upright, to seem stronger than she felt. I need to be able to look at myself in the mirror. I need to know I didn't sell myself, that I didn't destroy everything I worked for because of a kiss on a terrace. It was more than a kiss. Andrew's voice was rough, loaded, and you know it. It doesn't matter what it was. Nora shook her head, taking steps toward the door. Because whatever we had, it's over. It has to be over. Do you really believe that? Andrew blocked her path, not physically, but with the pure force of his presence. Do you really believe you can just turn off what you feel? Nora met his eyes, those damn gray eyes that saw her in ways no one else did, that made her want to be brave when she only wanted to run. I have to believe it, she whispered, because the alternative is admitting you were right, that I changed, that you changed something in me I don't know how to fix. She managed to get past him, managed to reach the door. Her fingers were on the handle when his voice stopped her. I know who sent the messages. Nora froze, turned slowly. Andrew had her phone in his hand, eyes fixed on the screen, jaw so tight she could see the muscle pulsing. When he looked up, there was recognition there, and anger. A cold, calculated anger, the kind that probably destroyed entire companies when directed. Victoria, he said the name, like a curse. My executive assistant. She has access to my files, to the foundation's donations, to my movements. He threw the phone back on the desk with controlled force. She's always been obsessed. I ignored the signs because it was convenient to have someone so dedicated. But this, Andrew, Nora began, but didn't know what to say. She won't touch you again. The words came out as a promise, as an oath. I promise she won't threaten you anymore. Won't try to destroy what we have. But she's not wrong. Nora felt new tears burn. About the newspapers. About how this will look. She's wrong about what matters. Andrew crossed the office in 3 strides, stopping in front of her. He didn't touch her, but stood close enough that she felt the heat, that she saw the absolute sincerity in his eyes. About what you are to me. About what this means. And what does it mean, Nora asked, her voice broken. It means, he said softly, that for the first time in 10 years, I have something worth fighting for. Someone worth fighting for. And for a moment, just one brief, dangerous moment, Nora almost believed, almost let the walls fall again. Almost. But then she remembered the photo, the threat, all the ways this could destroy her. I need time, she finally whispered. I need to think. Andrew nodded despite the evident pain on his face. As much time as you need. But Nora, no matter how much time passes, my answer will be the same. I'm not letting you go. And as she left the office, leaving behind the man who had shattered and rebuilt her world in a matter of weeks, Nora wondered, what if I don't want you to let me go? What if that's exactly the reason I need to run? Nora didn't return to the office that day or the next. She locked herself in her apartment, ignoring Andrew's calls, Rebecca's messages, even the worried texts from Marissa at the hospital asking if everything was okay. Nothing was okay. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, reliving every moment. The kiss on the terrace, the way Andrew had looked at her as if she were the only star in a dark sky, the implicit betrayal in the money he'd paid without permission, and above all, the threat. That photo, those poisonous words that made everything seem dirty, transactional, wrong. On the 3rd day, when the sun was already setting and she was considering for the 10th time whether she should just pack her things and disappear to another city, her phone rang. Not Andrew this time, a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer, but something, instinct, curiosity, fate, made her hand grab the device. Dr. Campbell. A female voice professional, cold. This is Sarah Chen from the New York Tribune. I'm calling to confirm some details about your relationship with Andrew Prescott before we publish the story tomorrow morning. Nora's blood froze. What story? About the romance between you two. We have photos, financial documents, everything. We wanted to give you a chance to comment before publication. It would be a shame if the story came out without your side, don't you think? The line went dead when Nora hung up with trembling hands. Victoria wasn't bluffing. She had actually gone to the newspapers, and tomorrow the whole world would know. The whole world would judge. The whole world would see Nora as she feared being seen, a doctor who had sold herself to her billionaire patient. She needed to warn Andrew. She needed to. But what? What could she do now? The doorbell rang shrill in the silence of the apartment. Nora dragged herself to the door, looked through the peephole, and her heart almost stopped. Andrew soaked to the bone. It had started to rain outside, and she hadn't even noticed. And he stood there in the hallway, his suit completely drenched, his hair dripping water on the floor, an expression on his face she'd never seen before. Absolute determination and fear. She opened the door. You can't be here, were the first words that came out of her mouth. I know. Andrew didn't try to enter, just stood there, dripping on the hallway carpet, holding a large envelope. But I needed you to see this before tomorrow. Tomorrow? Nora repeated the word bitterly. You already know then about the newspaper. Yes. He extended the envelope. And I've already taken care of it. Nora took the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside were several documents. The first was a resignation letter from Victoria, but it wasn't a simple resignation. It was accompanied by a detailed report of irregularities. Unauthorized access to confidential files. Leaking of proprietary information. Extortion. The second document was even more shocking, an official statement from Prescott Pharmaceuticals to be sent to all major press outlets detailing Victoria's actions, the threats she'd made, and attaching evidence, including screenshots of her conversations with reporters trying to sell the story. But the third document made Nora's heart stop completely. It was a public statement from Andrew, about her, about them. I confirm that Dr. Nora Campbell has been my personal physician for the past few months. I also confirm that during this time we developed feelings for each other. This is not a transactional relationship. It is not based on power or money, and it is nobody's business but ours. Any attempts to portray Dr. Campbell as anything less than the brilliant and compassionate professional she is will be met with the full force of the law. She owes me nothing, but I owe her everything." The tears started falling before Nora could stop them. You can't publish this. You'll expose yourself. I'll protect you." Andrew finally took a step into the apartment, closing the door behind him. Water dripped from his clothes, forming puddles on the wooden floor, but he didn't seem to notice, which is the only thing that matters. "But the company, your reputation, means nothing without you." He said the words with such simplicity, such certainty, it was impossible not to believe. "I've already lost too many people in my life, Nora. I'm not losing you. Not without a fight." "Andrew." Her voice failed. She didn't know what to say, how to tell this man, this impossible, stubborn, protective man, that he had just done the most insane and most romantic thing anyone had ever done for her. "Victoria was fired this afternoon," Andrew continued, taking a step toward her. "In front of the entire executive board, I showed the evidence of what she did, not just with you, but years of manipulation, of trying to control my personal life, of sabotaging any woman who came near me. Another step. She won't threaten you anymore. She won't have power over us anymore." "Everyone was there?" Nora asked, still processing. "The whole board?" "Everyone." A small smile touched his lips. "And when I finished exposing what she did, showing how she tried to destroy you, you know what happened?" Nora shook her head, unable to form words. They applauded. Andrew was close now, so close she could see the raindrops caught in his lashes, could feel the cold emanating from his soaked clothes. "Because they all already knew. They'd already seen how I look at you. They'd already noticed that for the first time in years I smile." "You're shaking," Nora whispered, finally noticing how he trembled slightly. "You're freezing. How long were you in the rain?" "I don't know," he admitted. "I was waiting outside the building for 2 hours. Trying to gather the courage to come up, trying to find the right words to convince you to give me another chance." 2 hours? Nora's voice came out high. "In the storm? Andrew, you just had heart surgery a month ago. You can't." "I can. And I did." He cut her off gently. "Because you're worth any storm. Worth any risk." Nora felt something inside her, that last protective wall she kept up, begin to crack. "You're going to catch pneumonia. Then take care of me." He raised his hand, touching her face with cold but incredibly gentle fingers. "You're my doctor, remember? You're impossible." But she was already pulling him inside, already removing the soaked jacket from his shoulders, already moving toward the bedroom in search of towels, dry clothes, anything. Andrew followed her, leaving a trail of water through the apartment. "What's impossible is keeping me away from you." She returned with towels and a large t-shirt, probably from medical school, old and faded, but dry. "Take off those wet clothes now." He obeyed, starting to unbutton his shirt with fingers that trembled slightly from the cold or something else. Nora wasn't sure. She should turn around, should give him privacy. But her eyes refused to look away. The shirt fell to the floor with a wet sound. The soft light of the apartment cast shadows on his torso, defined muscles, a still pink scar running down the center of his chest where she herself had operated, where she'd held his heart in her hands and made it beat again. "I saved this man," she thought, "and now he's saving me." "Nora," his voice was low, hoarse. "You're staring." "I'm your doctor," she replied. But the excuse sounded weak. "I'm checking the scar." Liar. But there was humor in his voice and warmth, and something deeper. He took a step toward her, then another, until he was close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes, close enough that she could see every raindrop running down his face, every wet lash, every breath that made his chest rise and fall. "I love you." The words came out simple, direct, without flourishes. "I know it's too soon. I know it's complicated. I know I'm breaking all the rules by saying this, but I don't care. Because it's true, and you deserve to know the truth." The world stopped. The air left Nora's lungs all at once. "Andrew, you don't have to say it back." He held her face in his hands, still cold from the rain, but warming against her skin. "You don't have to say anything. Just don't ask me to leave. Don't ask me to pretend I don't feel this." And Nora realized with absolute clarity that she was tired of running, tired of protecting herself, tired of being afraid. "You're an idiot," she whispered. But there were tears in her eyes and a smile on her lips, a wet, stubborn idiot who refuses to listen to medical advice. True, he smiled that devastating smile that completely transformed his face. But I'm your idiot. And then she kissed him. Not with the desperate urgency of the terrace, but with something deeper. Acceptance, surrender. The certainty that no matter how scary it was, no matter how many obstacles appeared, she wanted this. Wanted him. Andrew pulled her closer, deepening the kiss, one hand tangled in her hair, the other sliding down her back. She could feel his cold skin beginning to warm where their bodies touched, could feel his heart beating strong against her chest. Strong and steady and alive. I brought him back to life, she thought, and he brought me back to mine. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, foreheads touching, Andrew whispered, "Stay with me. Not as my doctor, not for money or contracts or any other reason. Just stay." And for the first time since it all began, since that fainting in the hallway, since the arms that caught her, since the gray eyes that saw through all her defenses, Nora had no doubts. "I'll stay," she whispered back. "I'll stay." And in that moment, with the storm roaring outside and the safety of his arms around her, Nora Campbell finally allowed herself to believe something she'd denied herself for so long. She deserved to be loved. And this impossible, stubborn, protective man, he loved her completely, unconditionally, and she was ready to love him back. The silence that followed the kiss was dense, loaded with unspoken promises. The rain continued beating against the windows, creating a hypnotic rhythm that isolated the apartment from the rest of the world. Inside, there were only the two of them, ragged breaths, racing hearts, and a tension that had been building for weeks, repressed, denied, and now finally released. Nora could feel the tremor in Andrew's hands, not from cold, though he was still only in wet pants, bare torso gleaming slightly under the soft light. It was something more. Restraint. Desire fighting against the fear of moving too fast, of scaring her, of breaking the fragile and precious moment that existed between them. "You're still shaking," she whispered, her fingers tracing the line of the scar on his chest, that permanent mark from when she had held his heart in her hands, literally kept him alive. Her work, her responsibility, and now her love. "It's not from the cold," Andrew admitted, his voice hoarse, loaded. His hand covered hers against his chest, pressing her palm against the skin, where she could feel his heart beating strong, irregular, alive. "It's you. What you do to me." Nora raised her eyes, meeting that gray gaze that consumed her, that saw through every defense, every fear, every secret desire. "Andrew, tell me to stop." He repeated the same words from the terrace, but now with a different urgency, a raw vulnerability. "Tell me and I will. I'll wait. I don't stop." The words came out before she could think, before she could question, before she could let fear win again. "Please don't stop." Something changed in his face, the last vestige of restraint dissolving. He moved closer slowly, giving her time to pull back if she wanted. But Nora didn't pull back. Not this time. Not anymore. With his thumb, Andrew brushed a strand of hair from her face, the touch so gentle it was almost painful in its tenderness. His eyes dove into hers, searching, asking, confirming, and when she nodded, a small movement almost imperceptible, he leaned in. The kiss began soft, exploratory, lips moving against lips with a reverent delicacy, as if she were something precious, fragile, sacred. But when Nora sighed against his mouth, when her hands moved up his arms, his shoulders, intertwining behind his neck, something in him let go. The kiss deepened, intensified. His tongue traced the line of her lips, asking for entry, and she granted it without hesitation. The taste of him flooded her, senses rain, and something purely masculine, something that was uniquely Andrew. His hands slid down her arms, her shoulders, leaving a trail of fire on her skin. When they reached her waist, he pulled her closer, eliminating any space between them. Nora could feel every hard line of his body against hers, every tense muscle, every ragged breath. "God, Nora," he murmured against her lips, his voice rough with desire. "You have no idea how long I've waited for this for you." She couldn't respond with words, just kissed him again, pouring out weeks of repressed desire, of sleepless nights fantasizing about this moment, of fighting what she felt, and finally allowing herself to feel. Andrew guided her backward slowly, carefully, until her back touched the wall. He pressed his body against hers, one of his thighs sliding between her legs in a way that made her gasp. His hands explored a slow trace down the side of her body, a thumb brushing the curve of her breast through the thin fabric of her blouse, making her arch against him. "You're so beautiful," he whispered, pulling back just enough to look at her. His eyes traveled over her face, memorizing every detail, the lips swollen from kisses, the flushed cheeks. The eyes darkened with desire. So perfect. Nora felt his fingers on the first button of her blouse. He stopped, eyes meeting hers again, silently asking permission. She nodded, and he began to unbutton one button at a time, with torturous slowness that made each inch of exposed skin burn under his gaze. The blouse fell to the floor, soon followed by her jeans. Nora stood there in her underwear, nothing elaborate, just simple black, but the way Andrew looked at her made her feel like the most desirable woman in the world. "You're incredible," he said, reverent, his fingers tracing the line of her collarbone, descending through the valley between her breasts, making her shiver. Absolutely incredible. He picked her up easily, strong muscles contrasting with the gentleness of his touch, and carried her toward the bedroom. Nora wrapped her legs around his waist, burying her face in his neck, inhaling that scent that haunted her, feeling the pulse beating strong under her lips when she kissed the skin there. Andrew laid her on the bed carefully, as if she were something too precious to be handled carelessly. He stood for a moment, just looking, and there was so much emotion in that gaze that Nora felt tears burn behind her eyes. "You're overdressed," she said, trying to sound provocative, but her voice coming out trembling with emotion. A small smile touched his lips. "I can fix that." He got rid of the wet pants, and then he was there, completely naked, completely vulnerable, completely beautiful. The soft light of the room cast shadows on his body, highlighting every muscle, every line, the scar on his chest that connected them in ways that went beyond the physical. Andrew joined her on the bed, his weight making the mattress sink slightly. He positioned himself over her, supporting himself on his elbows so as not to crush her, and kissed her again, deeper, more intense, conveying things that words couldn't express. His hands explored, learning every curve, every sensitive place that made her gasp or moan. When his fingers slid down the side of her body, when he removed the last fabric barriers between them, Nora felt completely exposed, but not vulnerable. Not with the way he looked at her, as if she were a miracle. "Are you sure?" Andrew asked one more time, positioned at her entrance, trembling with the effort to restrain himself. "If you want to stop, I've never been more sure of anything in my life." She pulled his face down, kissing him deeply. "I want you, Andrew. All of you." And then he entered slow, careful, giving her time to adjust, to feel every inch, every connection being formed. When he was completely inside, both gasped, not just from physical pleasure, but from the overwhelming intimacy of the moment. "God, Nora," he moaned, his face buried in her neck. This is—" "I know." She held his face, forcing him to look at her. "I feel it too." They began to move together, a slow, lazy rhythm, as if they had all the time in the world. It wasn't just sex. It was communication. Each touch said, "I see you." Each kiss whispered, "You matter." Each movement promised, "I'm not leaving." Andrew kissed her neck, her shoulders whispering words against her skin. "You're everything," he murmured. "Everything I didn't know I needed. Everything I didn't know I was looking for." Her hands traveled over his back, feeling the muscles contracting under her palm, feeling his heart beating strong against her chest. She arched against him, meeting each movement, creating a dance that was theirs alone. The pleasure built slowly, like waves gradually growing until they became a storm. Nora could feel herself approaching the precipice, every nerve in her body singing, every touch from Andrew intensifying the sensation. "Look at me," Andrew asked, his voice desperate. "I want to see you. I want to see everything." She opened her eyes, meeting that gray gaze that consumed her. And that was it, that connection, that intimacy of being completely seen that pushed her over the edge. The orgasm passed through her in waves, stealing her breath, making her body tremble. She said his name, or tried to, but it came out only as an incoherent moan. And when she felt him shatter too, felt his muscles contract, heard her own name coming from his lips like a prayer, Nora knew that nothing would be the same. They had crossed a line, not just physical, but emotional, spiritual. There was no going back. Afterward, lying embraced skin against skin, Breath still uneven, Andrew pulled her closer. She rested her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat strong under her ear, that heart she had saved, that heart that now beat for her. "I could spend the rest of my life like this," he whispered, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her back. Nora smiled against his skin. "With your doctor monitoring your heartbeat?" He laughed, a low, rich, happy sound. "With the woman I love in my arms." The words hung in the air between them, precious and frightening at the same time. Nora raised her head, meeting his eyes. "I love you too," she said, and it was the purest truth she had ever spoken. "I think I loved you from the moment you caught me falling in that hallway." The smile that lit up his face was like sunrise, transformative, beautiful, full of promises. And as the rain finally diminished outside, giving way to a clear, starry sky, Nora Campbell finally understood what it meant to be home. It wasn't a place. It was a person. And that person held her heart with the same care she held his. The morning light filtered through the curtains, soft and golden, painting the room in amber tones. Nora woke first, her body still warmed by Andrew's arms around her, his leg intertwined with hers, his face buried in her hair. She stayed still for a moment, just feeling the comforting weight of him beside her, the regular breathing against her neck, the absolute security of being exactly where she should be. It was strange how everything had changed in such a short time. Weeks ago, she was just an exhausted surgeon surviving on coffee and willpower, carrying the weight of the world alone. And now she had this. Had him. Andrew stirred, tightening his embrace instinctively, pulling her closer even in sleep. Nora smiled, turning carefully to face him. At rest, he looked younger, the lines of tension around his eyes softened, the usually controlled expression replaced by something peaceful, almost vulnerable. She lightly traced the line of his jaw with her fingers, barely touching, not wanting to wake him. But his eyes opened anyway, those gray eyes that saw her in ways no one else did. "Good morning," he murmured, his voice thick with sleep. But there was a small smile on his lips. "Good morning." Nora felt her cheeks flush under his intense gaze. Even after the previous night, there was still something intimidating about the way he watched her, as if he were memorizing every detail, as if he feared she might disappear. "You're real," Andrew said softly, his hand rising to touch her face, his thumb caressing her cheek. "I was half afraid I'd wake up and find out it was all a dream. I'm real." She covered his hand with hers. "And so are you." They stayed like that for a long moment, just looking, communicating in silence. But there was something in his gaze, a shadow that passed quickly, an old pain he tried to hide but couldn't completely. "What is it?" Nora asked gently. "You're thinking about something." Andrew hesitated, and she could see the internal battle, the instinct to protect, to keep walls up, fighting against the desire to finally let someone in completely. "I never told you," he began slowly, "about why I stopped believing I deserved this, deserved happiness." Nora waited, giving him space, giving him time. Her hand found his between them, intertwining their fingers, offering silent anchor. "I was married," Andrew continued, his eyes fixed on some distant point, lost in memories. "Sarah. We met in college. She was pure, light, laughed at everything, saw the good in everyone, exactly the opposite of me." A sad smile touched his lips. "We married young, had a daughter, Emma. 3 years old, curly hair, eyes like her mother's." Nora's heart squeezed. She could already feel where the story was going, could see the pain accumulating on his face like storm clouds. "I worked a lot," Andrew said, his voice getting rougher. "Always worked too much. Building the company, closing deals, chasing the next success. Sarah asked me to stay home more. Emma asked me to play with her. And I always said, tomorrow. Always tomorrow." He stopped, his jaw tightening, his eyes growing bright with unshed tears. Nora squeezed his hand silently, encouraging him to continue. "Until there were no more tomorrows." The words came out broken. "Car accident. Drunk driver. They never saw it coming. Sarah died instantly. Emma held on for 3 days in the hospital. I was there when she... His voice failed completely. And then, for the first time since Nora had known him, Andrew Prescott cried. Not silently, not with the controlled restraint he maintained in everything, but with deep, devastating sobs, years of pain finally finding release. Nora pulled him into her arms, holding him while he fell apart. Her own tears flowed silently, feeling his pain as if it were her own, wishing she could absorb it, take it from him, do anything to ease the weight he carried. I should have been there. Andrew sobbed against her shoulder. Should have gone with them. Should have made time. Should have. Andrew, no. Nora held his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her through the tears. You can't blame yourself. It wasn't your fault. It was a terrible accident, but it wasn't your fault. But I failed them. His voice was broken, raw, failed to be present, failed to give them what they deserved. And after they were gone, I swore I'd never let it happen again, that I'd never let anyone get close enough that I could fail them too. So you locked yourself away. Nora finally understood. Built walls. Worked non-stop so you wouldn't have to feel. Exactly. Andrew wiped the tears with the back of his hand, looking almost embarrassed to have shed them. For 10 years it worked. I didn't feel anything. Didn't want anything. Just existed. And then, Nora asked softly, though she already knew the answer, and then you. He met her eyes and there was something in them now. Not just pain but also hope. Fragile, scared hope, but real. And suddenly, I was feeling again, wanting again, afraid again because the idea of losing you, Nora, is unbearable. You're not going to lose me, she said the words firmly, with certainty. I'm not going anywhere. How can you be sure? The vulnerability in his voice broke her heart. How can you promise that when the world is so unpredictable? I can't, Nora admitted honestly. I can't promise nothing bad will happen. I can't promise we'll have forever. But I can promise this while I'm here, while I'm breathing. Every day, I choose you. Fresh tears rolled down his face, but this time there was a smile mixed with them. Every day, every day. She kissed his forehead, his eyes, his tear-wet cheeks. On good days and bad, on easy days and impossible ones, I choose you. Andrew pulled her closer, burying his face in her neck, breathing deeply as if anchoring himself in her, finding strength in her presence. I don't know how to do this, he admitted against her skin. How to let someone in. How not to be afraid of losing again. You don't have to be strong all the time, Andrew. Nora ran her fingers through his hair, the gesture comforting, maternal. Not with me. You can be human. You can be imperfect. You can be afraid and I'll still be here. They stayed like that for a long time, intertwined, vulnerable, completely present to each other. There was no rush, no need for words, just the silent acceptance that they had both been broken by their pasts and now were choosing to rebuild together. Finally, Andrew lifted his head, looking at her with red but clear eyes. There was a lightness in him now that wasn't there before, as if sharing that old pain had released something he'd been keeping locked for too long. Thank you, he said simply. For what? For letting me in. For not running when you saw all the mess I am. He touched her face reverently. For making me believe that maybe I deserve this. Deserve you. You do deserve it, Nora said firmly. You deserve to be happy, Andrew. Deserve to have love. Deserve to have a second chance. And you? He asked. Do you believe you deserve this too? The question caught her off guard. She had spent so much time taking care of everyone else, carrying the weight of the world alone, believing that asking for help was weakness, that she'd never stop to consider if she deserved more. I'm learning, she admitted. You're teaching me. Andrew smiled, not the controlled smile he showed the world, but something genuine, transformative. Then let's learn together. Let's make mistakes together. Let's figure out how to make this work one day at a time. One day at a time, Nora repeated, liking the sound of that. No pressure, no impossible expectations, just presence. Stay with me, Andrew asked again, echoing the words from the night before. But this time there was something different in them, not desperation, but invitation. Not as an employee, not because of contracts or obligations. Just stay. Build a life with me. Be my partner, my equal. My yours. Nora finished for him. I'm yours and you're mine. And that's enough. He kissed her then, not with the burning passion of the previous night, but with something deeper. Gratitude. Promise, the kind of kiss that seals silent agreements and creates shared futures. When they pulled apart, both were smiling through tears. So, Andrew said, a note of humor entering his voice for the first time, does this mean you're not going to charge me $1 million a month anymore to put up with my impossible habits? Nora laughed, a light, free, happy sound. Oh, I'm still going to charge you, but now it's because you're insufferable and stubborn and refuse to eat properly, not because it's my job. Fair enough." He pulled her back into his arms, settling comfortably in bed as if he had no intention of moving anytime soon. "Although technically making sure I eat properly is part of taking care of me." "Technically," Nora agreed, snuggling against his chest, listening to that strong, steady heartbeat, living proof that sometimes second chances were possible. Outside, the city was waking up, the distant sound of horns, the murmur of lives being lived, the world continuing its unstoppable course. But inside, in the small sanctuary of that room bathed in the golden morning light, time seemed to have stopped. And for the first time in their lives, both Andrew and Nora understood a fundamental truth. They didn't need to be perfect, didn't need to have all the answers, didn't need to carry their burdens alone. They just needed to choose every day, in every moment. Choose to be present. Choose to be vulnerable, choose to love even when it scared them. And in that moment, wrapped in each other with ghosts of the past finally released and hopes for the future beginning to bloom, they did exactly that. They chose, and that choice made all the difference. 6 months later, the auditorium at Prescott Tower was packed with reporters, executives, board members, and representatives from the country's leading medical institutions. Camera flashes exploded at regular intervals, capturing every moment of what would be one of the most important announcements in the company's history. Nora stood backstage, adjusting for the 10th time the impeccable white blazer she wore. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from adrenaline, from anticipation, from a nervous excitement that made her heart race. "You look beautiful." Andrew's voice came from behind her, warm and familiar. She felt his hands land on her shoulders, firm and comforting. "And you're going to be incredible out there." Nora turned to face him. He wore a dark gray suit that brought out his eyes, tie perfectly adjusted, hair combed back, but it was the smile, that genuine, transformative smile reserved only for her, that made her stomach tighten in ways that had nothing to do with nervousness. "What if I forget what to say?" she asked, knowing she sounded ridiculous. She'd given medical presentations to hundreds of people before, but this was different. This was personal. Impossible. Andrew held her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. "You're the most brilliant woman I've ever met, and all you need to do is be yourself. Talk about what you love. The rest will flow naturally. When did you get so wise?" She tried to sound provocative, but her voice came out soft, affected. "Since a certain stubborn doctor taught me that not everything in life needs to be controlled." He kissed her forehead gently. "That sometimes you just need to trust and let it happen." "I love you," Nora said, the words coming naturally now, without fear, without hesitation, something she said every day and never tired of repeating. "I love you too." Andrew smiled against her skin. "Now, go out there and show the world why you're extraordinary." An assistant appeared at the door. "Dr. Campbell." "Mr. Prescott, are you ready?" Nora took a deep breath, smoothed her blazer one more time, and nodded. Andrew extended his hand, and she took it, intertwining their fingers. Together, they walked toward the stage. The lights were bright, almost blinding. The murmur of the crowd diminished when Andrew approached the podium, his presence commanding instant attention even without saying a word. Nora stood beside him, conscious of all eyes on them, of all the cameras capturing every movement. But when she looked at the audience, she didn't see judgment. She saw curiosity, expectation, and, in some faces, especially those of medical colleagues, she recognized she saw respect. "Good afternoon," Andrew's voice echoed through the auditorium, firm and clear. "Thank you all for coming. Today isn't just about announcing a new division of Prescott Pharmaceuticals. It's about revolutionizing how we think about medical research, about patient care, about the intersection between medicine and humanity." He paused, glancing briefly at Nora. There was pride in his eyes and something more. Love, unmistakable and open for all to see. "In the last 6 months," Andrew continued, "I've had the privilege of working alongside one of the most brilliant medical minds of our generation. Someone who not only literally saved my life, but who taught me that true medicine isn't just about numbers, protocols, and profits. It's about seeing people. About restoring not just bodies, but hope." He turned completely to her. "Dr. Nora Campbell revolutionized my understanding of what's possible when we combine scientific excellence with genuine compassion. And that's why today I'm proud to announce the creation of Prescott Pharmaceuticals' Integrated Medical Research Division, dedicated to developing accessible, patient-centered treatments that don't just prolong lives, but improve their quality. Applause exploded through the auditorium. Nora felt tears burn behind her eyes but maintained her composure, smiling as Andrew continued. And leading this division as our Chief Medical Director, Dr. Nora Campbell. More applause, more flashes. Andrew stepped away from the podium, gesturing for her to take over. For a moment, Nora was paralyzed, the weight of the moment hitting her completely. But then she felt Andrew's hand briefly squeeze hers, a quick touch of encouragement, and she moved. The podium seemed enormous. The expectant silence was deafening. But when Nora looked at the audience again, she didn't see strangers. She saw potential. She saw hope. She saw the chance to make a real difference. Thank you, Andrew. And thank you all for being here. Her voice came out firmer than she expected. When I entered medicine, it was because I believed that caring was the noblest calling anyone could answer. But somewhere along the way, the system taught me that caring had to be transactional, that I had to choose between excellence and compassion, between science and humanity. She paused, letting the words land. But I discovered that's a false choice. That the greatest medical innovations come from seeing patients as whole people, not just symptoms to treat, but lives to restore. And it's this philosophy that will guide our new division. Nora felt confidence growing as she spoke, the words flowing naturally now. We're going to develop treatments for neglected diseases. We're going to make life-saving medications accessible to underserved communities. We're going to train the next generation of doctors to see beyond the charts and really see the people in front of them. The applause began again, but she gently raised her hand, indicating she wasn't finished yet. This opportunity didn't come out of nowhere, Nora continued, her voice becoming softer, more personal. It came because someone saw me when I was invisible. Someone believed in me when I'd forgotten to believe in myself. Someone taught me that accepting help isn't weakness, it's courage. Her eyes found Andrew at the side of the stage. He was smiling, that smile that completely transformed his face. And she saw her own emotions reflected back. Pride, love, gratitude. So, thank you, she said, still looking at him even while speaking to the entire auditorium, for teaching me that sometimes the greatest transformations begin when we stop trying to do everything alone, when we choose to trust, when we choose to let someone catch us when we fall. The silence in the auditorium was absolute now, everyone present clearly understanding they were witnessing something more than a corporate announcement. They were witnessing a love story of redemption, of two broken people finding healing in each other. And it's this principle, Nora concluded, turning back to the audience, that will guide everything we do. Because medicine, in the end, isn't about healing in isolation. It's about healing together. It's about community, connection, and the fundamental belief that everyone deserves to be cared for with dignity and compassion. She stepped back from the podium. Thank you. The ovation was instantaneous and deafening. People stood applauding not just the announcement, but the vulnerability, the honesty, the humanity that Nora had brought to that usually cold and corporate space. Andrew was the first to reach her when she came down from the stage. He didn't care about the cameras, about the reporters, about the executives watching. He just pulled her into his arms, holding her tight, whispering against her hair, "You were perfect. Absolutely perfect." Later that night, after the interviews ended, after the congratulations were given, after the last reporter finally left, Nora and Andrew walked the streets of Manhattan. It was October again, exactly 1 year since that 26-hour shift, since the fainting in the hallway, since the beginning of everything. The trees in Central Park were exploding in shades of gold and crimson, leaves falling like natural confetti around them. "Thoughtful?" Andrew asked, noticing her silence. "Just processing." Nora squeezed his hand intertwined with hers as they walked. "A year ago, I was so lost, so tired, so convinced I had to carry everything alone. And now?" There was a smile in his voice. "And now I have you." She stopped, turning to face him under the soft light of an old lamppost. "I have a job I love. I have purpose. I have a future." "We have a future," Andrew corrected, pulling her closer. "Together." "Together," Nora repeated, liking how the word sounded, liking how it felt, finally, to not be alone. Andrew looked at her for a long moment, those gray eyes she loved so much, reflecting the light from the park lamps. Then, slowly, He knelt down. Nora's heart stopped. "Andrew, what are you?" "I know it's early," he began, holding her hands in his. "I know we've only had a year. I know we're still figuring this out, but Nora, you changed everything." Tears were already streaming down her face, her heart beating so hard she was sure he could hear it. "You brought me back to life in ways that go beyond what you did in that operating room," Andrew continued, his voice loaded with emotion. "You taught me that living isn't just surviving, it's choosing joy. It's choosing vulnerability. It's choosing love even when it scares you. Especially when it scares you." He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. When he opened it, the light caught a ring. Simple, elegant, a single diamond that sparkled like a captured star. "So I'm choosing," he said. "I'm choosing you every day for the rest of my life. Dr. Nora Campbell, would you do me the impossible honor of marrying me?" Nora couldn't speak. The words were stuck in her throat, mixed with sobs and laughter, and pure, inexplicable joy. So she simply nodded vigorously, desperately, while tears flowed freely. "Yes," she finally managed to say. "Yes, 1,000 times. Yes." Andrew slid the ring onto her finger with slightly trembling hands, and then she pulled him up, kissing him with all the emotion she couldn't express in words. There, under the October trees of Central Park, with leaves dancing around them and the city murmuring its approval in the background, two people who had been broken found not just healing, but wholeness. "You changed everything, Nora," Andrew whispered against her lips. And she smiled that smile that now came so easily, so naturally, so different from the exhausted and hopeless woman he'd met a year ago. "And you showed me that even the most broken hearts can beat again." They kissed again, not with urgency, but with the certainty of those who have finally found their place, their home, their person. And as they walked hand in hand back home, their home now shared, built together, Nora understood a final truth. Sometimes you need to fall apart completely before you can be rebuilt. Sometimes you need to be so lost you can't see a way out. Sometimes you need to hit rock bottom before discovering there are arms waiting to catch you. And sometimes, just sometimes, those arms belong to someone who was just as broken as you. Someone who understands that healing isn't linear. Someone who knows that love isn't perfection, but choice. Someone who sees you, really sees you, and decides to stay. And that, Nora knew now, was the rarest and most precious kind of love. The kind worth fighting for. The kind worth choosing. The kind that changes everything. Nora Campbell entered that hospital, believing that saving lives was all that mattered. But it was Andrew Prescott's arms, the man whose heart she rebuilt, that taught her the deepest truth. Sometimes you need to let someone save you too. She learned that strength isn't in carrying everything alone, but in having the courage to reach out. That true love isn't a transaction. It's transformation. And that the most beautiful endings begin when we stop running and choose to stay. Because deep down, we all carry scars. We've all felt lost, exhausted, invisible. But maybe, just maybe, we're all waiting for someone who sees us, really sees us, and decides we're worth it.